This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the We Act Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
All right, we are back on The Zero Hour, and we have a great hour coming up for you. We have Mark Ames, writer of the Pando Daily, talking a little bit of a different angle on Putin. He lived in Russia. He knows the Putin Society from a different side. So we're going to talk to Mark. We're going to have T.L. Lesson, director and producer of the film Citizen Coke, and we are going to have Casey Ray, director of the Future of Music Coalition, talking about the FCC and net neutrality. They're a great organization, so stick around. But before we do it, I got to talk about Tim Geithner again. Here's the deal. He continues to spread these misconceptions about Social Security, and it's interesting because I had a personal meeting with Geithner, I and a few other writers in 2010, and it made me think of it. Here's the quote from his book that got publicized this week. He said, and I'm quoting Geithner here, "I remember during one Roosevelt Room prep session before I appeared on the Sunday shows, I objected when Dan Pfeiffer, I guess he's a communication guy for the White House, wanted me to say that Social Security didn't contribute to the deficit." Again, this is Geithner. "It wasn't a main driver of our future deficits, but it did contribute." That is not true, but let me go on. Pfeiffer said the line was a dog whistle to the left, a phrase I had never heard before. He had to explain the phrase was code to the Democratic base, signaling that we intended to protect Social Security. Wow, there's so much information in this little quote. Number one, that after all this time, Tim Geithner has never learned that Social Security does not and cannot and is forbidden by the law from contributing to the deficit. Number one. Number two, this is the way that elites, especially in this case on the Democratic side, silence the voices of reason, silence the voice of economists like Dean Baker, silence the voice of social insurance policy people like me who did work on the national level in Eastern Europe, interestingly enough, with what's on now. Silences everybody's voice in order to say that it's all code to a Democratic base and that it's not really real, the way they kind of filter out these voices. But first, let me go, and really, you'd never heard the phrase dog whistle, and you can't figure out. The first time I heard it, I kind of figured out what it meant, and instantly, which is something that's silent to most people, but is heard by those who are intended to hear it. That's not complicated. It should be easy to figure out. Tim, dog whistle. But anyway, back to this notion that Social Security was a partial or somewhat of a contributor to future deficits. No. Here's how Social Security works, Mr. Geithner, and this I tried to explain to you when we had our argument in your office that day. Number one, it is forbidden by law from contributing to the deficit. If the trust fund runs out, it has to continue to operate based on the money it collects that year. That's why you and other people are raising the alarm over the fact that in 2033 or sometime in that decade, benefits might have to be cut if we don't get more revenue for it. Now, why would benefits need to be cut? Because the ultra wealthy are capturing so much more of our national income that it's not being taxed by the payroll tax that finances Social Security. So lift that cap so that you can capture more of it and restore the balance of the program. That's not a dog whistle. That's just mathematics. That's actuarial. Ronald Reagan's actuary says that's the solution. So it doesn't contribute to the deficit. It has to cut benefits before it's allowed to contribute to the deficit. Now, the only way you can even conceive of it contributing to the deficit, other than some misunderstanding of macroeconomics, is by saying that, well, the deficit will be worse if we have to pay back that trust fund in the next 20 years instead of just keeping the money for our tax cuts to the rich or whatever. And sure, you could say that if you want to welsh on the legal instruments, binding instruments that were signed to the Social Security Trust Fund when it lent money to the federal government, yeah, that would help. But why don't you welsh on the money, the treasury bonds that banks own first, because that too would contribute to the deficit. So please, Mr. Geithner, please learn your economics. It's a legal, economic, and moral question. Economically, you can only say it contributes to the debt if you're willing to break the legal agreements and the moral agreements you made with the American people when you borrowed that money from the trust fund. I don't think you want to do that. That's not a dog whistle. And if you want to know what a dog whistle is, then to quote Lauren Bacall from the Humphrey Bogart movie, just pucker your lips and blow. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero